In the frontier town of Red Hollow, a young woman named Eliza Harrow is running from a brutal marriage, starving, hunted, with nowhere left to hide. When armed trackers arrive searching for her, she makes an impossible choice: walk into the killing desert or face capture. But in that wasteland, dying of thirst and heat, she's found by a silent warrior named Kyle, who offers something she's never known: freedom without conditions. This is a story of survival, transformation, and the courage to claim a life worth living. Stay with me until the end, hit like, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The desert wind came hard across Red Hollow's main street, kicking up dust devils that scattered chickens and sent laundry snapping on clotheslines. Eliza Harrow pressed herself against the weathered boards of Miller's General Store, her breath coming shallow and quick. Through the gap between buildings, she could see them: 3 riders, dust-caked and deliberate, moving down the center of town like they owned every inch of dirt beneath their horses' hooves. She recognized the lead rider's posture before she saw his face. Marcus Drummond, her husband's right hand, the man who'd broken her ribs 2 months ago for looking at a peddler too long. Eliza's stomach twisted. She hadn't eaten in a day and a half. The coins she'd stolen when she fled, all she had in the world, had bought her passage this far west and nothing more. Red Hollow was supposed to be far enough, remote enough. A place where a woman could disappear into the dust and sagebrush and maybe, if fortune allowed it, start over with a new name and a quiet life washing dishes or mending clothes. She'd been a fool to hope. "Seen a woman come through here?" Marcus's voice carried across the street. He was talking to old Benjamin Hart, who stood outside his blacksmith shop with his arms crossed. Thin, dark hair, skittish, probably begging for work. Benjamin spat into the dirt. "You law?" "Private matter." "Then I got nothing to say about who comes and goes." Marcus leaned forward in his saddle, and even from 30 yards away, Eliza could see the shift in his expression, the cold calculation that preceded violence. "That's unfortunate. Her husband wants her back. Man's got rights to his property." "Property." Benjamin's laugh was short and bitter. "Get off my street before I decide you're the kind of pest that needs removing." The blacksmith was old, but his shoulders were still broad from decades of hammerwork. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that promised a reckoning later. He touched his hat brim in mock courtesy and turned his horse. "We'll be asking around. Town this size. Somebody's seen her." Eliza didn't wait to hear more. She slipped between the buildings, her worn boots silent on the packed earth. Behind Miller's store, the town gave way to scattered homesteads and then nothing, just the vast stretch of desert that ran all the way to the mountains, purple-gray smudges on the horizon. She'd heard stories about those mountains, about people who lived up there, strange and separate from the settlements, about men who went looking for them and never came back. Her hand went to the small knife tucked in her belt, the only weapon she had. It wasn't much. It wouldn't stop Marcus if he caught her. Wouldn't stop any of the 3 men he'd brought. She thought about Charles, her husband, sitting in his study back in Grafton with his brandy and his ledgers and his absolute certainty that everything, land, money, people, could be owned if you had enough power to claim it. He'd married her when she was 17, a transaction arranged by her father to settle gambling debts. 3 years of Charles's cold rages and careful cruelties had taught her what ownership meant in his world. She was 20 now, and she was done being property. A hand grabbed her arm, and Eliza's knife was out before she could think. She spun, blade up, and found herself staring into the startled face of Anna Chen, who ran the boarding house on 4th Street. "Easy." Anna raised both hands, stepping back. "It's just me." Eliza lowered the knife, her heart hammering. "Sorry, I thought—" "I know what you thought. I saw those men." Anna glanced toward the main street, then back. She was perhaps 40, with gray threading through her black hair and the kind of steady eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. "You're the one they're looking for." It wasn't a question. Eliza didn't answer. "How long since you ate?" "I'm fine." "You look half dead. Come on." Anna turned and walked toward the back door of her boarding house. Eliza hesitated, but hunger won out over caution. She followed. The kitchen was small and clean, smelling of bread and coffee. Anna pointed to a chair, then moved to the stove without waiting for Eliza to sit. She did anyway, too tired to do anything else. "They'll search the whole town," Anna said, ladling stew into a bowl. "They're the type. Methodical." They'll knock on every door, look in every barn, check every crawl space. I know. Eliza took the bowl Aunt Anna set in front of her. The stew was simple. Beans, salt, pork, onions, but it might as well have been a feast. She forced herself to eat slowly. I'll be gone before dark. Gone where? Eliza gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the desert beyond. Out there. Anna sat down across from her, holding a cup of coffee between both hands. That's suicide. You got water, food, any idea where you're going? Better than staying. Is it? Anna's voice was quiet. Desert'll kill you just as dead as whatever those men have planned. Slower, maybe. More painful, definitely. Then that's my choice to make. They sat in silence while Eliza finished the stew. Through the window, she could hear voices in the distance. Marcus and his men, going door to door just like Anna had predicted. The sound made her skin crawl. Anna stood and went to a cabinet. She pulled out a canvas pack and started filling it. Hardtack, dried meat, a small tin of coffee, 2 canteens. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Why are you helping me? Eliza asked. Because I was married once too. Anna didn't look up from the pack. Long time ago, different circumstances, but I remember what it feels like when the world tells you to be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity a man allows you to keep. She cinched the pack closed and set it on the table. There's enough here for 3, maybe 4 days if you're careful. Head south along the foothills. There's a canyon about 15 miles out. You'll see it. Cuts deep into the rock. Follow it west. I've heard there's water up there. Can't promise more than that. Eliza stared at the pack, then at Anna. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. A knock sounded at the front door. Sharp, insistent. Anna's expression didn't change. That'll be them. Back door's open. Go now. Quiet. Don't look back. Eliza grabbed the pack, slinging it over her shoulder. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me if you survive. Another knock, louder this time. Anna stood and walked toward the front of the house, calling out, Hold on! I'm coming! She glanced back once, meeting Eliza's eyes, and nodded toward the door. Eliza ran. The sun was dropping toward the western horizon when she finally stopped running and allowed herself to look back. Red Hollow was a smudge of buildings in the distance, already wavering in the heat shimmer. No riders, no pursuit yet. But they'd figure out she was gone soon enough, and men like Marcus didn't give up easy. The desert stretched in every direction, broken only by scattered sage and the occasional Joshua tree, standing like a sentinel against the empty sky. The mountains looked no closer than they had from town. Eliza adjusted the pack on her shoulders and started walking. The first night, she huddled against a rock outcropping, trying to preserve her body heat as the temperature plummeted. She'd never understood how the desert could be so hot during the day and so cold after dark. Sleep came in fragments between bouts of shivering. The second day, the heat was worse. The sun felt personal, malicious, pressing down on her until even breathing seemed like too much effort. She rationed the water like Anna had probably intended. Small sips, just enough to keep going. But by midday, she could feel her thoughts starting to slip sideways. She found the canyon around sunset. It appeared suddenly, a dark gash in the earth that hadn't been visible until she was almost standing on its edge. The walls dropped away into shadow, and somewhere far below, she thought she could hear water moving. Getting down was treacherous. The path, if it could be called that, was little more than a series of natural ledges and slopes. Eliza's boot slipped twice, sending showers of loose rock cascading into the darkness. She caught herself both times, but the second near fall left her pressed against the canyon wall, heart racing, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But there was water. She could hear it more clearly now, a steady whisper echoing off stone. When she finally reached the canyon floor, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. The walls blocked the sun, creating a corridor of blessed coolness. A thin stream ran along the base, clear and cold. Eliza dropped to her knees and drank until her stomach hurt, then filled both canteens. She made camp in a sheltered spot where the canyon wall curved inward, creating a shallow cave. There was old charcoal on the ground. Someone had camped here before. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. She ate hardtack and dried meat, then wrapped herself in her shawl and tried to sleep. The dreams came hard that night. Charles's voice, telling her she was worthless, ungrateful, that she should be on her knees thanking him for tolerating her existence. Marcus's hands, bruising her arms as he dragged her back to the house after she'd tried to run the first time. The locked room. The dark. The hunger. She woke gasping, covered in cold sweat despite the night chill. The third day, she followed the canyon west like Anna had said. The stream continued alongside her, and she began to notice other signs of life. Rabbit tracks in the soft earth, a hawk circling overhead, juniper trees clinging to the canyon walls. The landscape was harsh, but not dead. That felt important somehow. Around midday, she heard horses. The sound echoed strangely in the canyon, making it impossible to tell which direction it came from or how far away. Eliza pressed herself against the wall, scanning the rim high above. Nothing. But the sound continued, hoofbeats definitely, and voices. She moved as quietly as she could, staying close to the shadows. The canyon began to widen, the walls gradually sloping outward. Ahead, the stream bed curved around a massive boulder. When she rounded the boulder, she saw them. 3 riders sat their horses in the middle of the stream, not 50 feet away. But these weren't Marcus's men. These riders were different, their clothes a mix of buckskin and woven cloth, their horses lean and alert. 2 men and a woman, all of them dark-haired and weathered. They sat completely still, watching her. Eliza's hand went to her knife, but she didn't draw it. Running was pointless. Fighting was suicide. She stood there, trying to look less terrified than she felt, and waited. The rider in the center, a man perhaps 10 years older than her, with a scar cutting across his left eyebrow, nudged his horse forward. He stopped 10 feet away and studied her with dark, unreadable eyes. "You're a long way from anywhere," he said. His voice was calm, neutral. "I'm passing through." "Passing through to where?" Eliza gestured vaguely west. "That way." The woman rider, younger than the man but carrying herself with the same quiet confidence, exchanged a glance with her companions. "Nothing that way but more desert and the high country. You planning to cross the mountains on foot with 1 pack?" "If I have to." The scarred man tilted his head slightly. "You running from someone or toward something?" The question was too direct to deflect. Eliza met his eyes and made a choice, the same choice she'd made when she walked into the desert. "From law? Worse, a husband who thinks I'm property." The woman made a sound that might have been sympathy or understanding. The third rider, an older man with gray in his beard, spat into the stream. The scarred man was quiet for a long moment. Then he swung down from his horse with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He approached slowly, hands visible and empty. "My name is Kyle. These are my people, Elena and Thomas. We live in the mountains." He studied her face. "You look like you haven't slept in days. Haven't eaten much either." "I'm managing." "Are you?" It wasn't mocking, just observation. "How much water you got left?" Eliza glanced at the canteens on her pack. "Enough. For what? Another day? 2? Cale crossed his arms. "The desert gets worse west of here before it gets better. No water, no shade. You'll be dead before you make it to the high country." "Maybe." "Definitely." He paused. "We're headed back to our settlement. It's hidden, up in the peaks where the air is thin and the land is hard. We don't welcome strangers as a rule. Too risky. But we also don't leave people to die when we can prevent it." Elena guided her horse closer. "Kael, we don't know her. Don't know who she's running from or what she's done. She's running from a husband who claims ownership. That's enough for me." Kael looked back at Eliza. "I'm offering you a choice. Come with us, rest, eat, decide what you want to do next. Or keep walking west and take your chances with the desert. But understand, if you choose the desert, you're choosing death. It won't be quick, and it won't be kind." Eliza wanted to laugh. Choice. As if she'd ever had that luxury. As if the world offered real choices to women like her rather than different flavors of surrender. But looking at Kael, at the steady certainty in his eyes, she found herself believing him. Not because she trusted him, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but because what he was offering wasn't ownership, it was possibility. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "I leave when I want. No obligations, no strings." "Agreed. And if these people looking for me show up, They won't find our settlement. No one does unless we want them to. Thomas, the older rider, grunted. Been living up there 20 years. Army tried to find us once, sent a whole company. They turned back after 3 weeks with nothing to show but frostbite and dead horses. Eliza looked at each of them in turn, trying to read intention in their faces. Elena's expression was wary but not hostile. Thomas looked vaguely amused. Kael just waited, patient as stone. She thought about the desert ahead, about dying alone, her bones picked clean by scavengers, just another woman who disappeared into the wasteland because the world had no room for her. All right, she said, I'll come. Kael nodded and turned back to his horse. Elena, she can ride with you. We'll move faster that way. The climb out of the canyon took the rest of the afternoon. The horses picked their way up narrow trails that Eliza would have sworn were impassable, while she clung to Elena's waist and tried not to look down. At the top, the landscape opened into rolling foothills studded with pine and aspen. They rode until full dark, then made camp in a clearing protected by rock formations. Thomas built a small fire while Elena unpacked supplies. Kael tended the horses, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from routine. When they finally sat down to eat, Eliza discovered she was ravenous. The food was simple: cornbread, venison jerky, wild greens, but after days of hardtack and terror, it tasted like a revelation. How long were you running? Elena asked, breaking the silence. 5 days from Grafton, 2 more getting to Red Hollow. Eliza kept her eyes on her plate. Then 3 days in the desert. That's a long time to run on fear and stubbornness. It's all I had. Thomas poured coffee from a battered pot, passing cups around. This husband of yours, he the type to give up easy? No. Rich? Very. That's inconvenient. Thomas took a sip of coffee. Rich men have resources, hired men, long memories. Kael leaned forward, his face half in shadow. But they also have limits. Rich men don't like discomfort, don't like sleeping on hard ground and eating trail rations and chasing ghosts through country that wants them dead. Eventually, the cost exceeds the value of the prize. I'm not a prize, Eliza said quietly. I know, but that's how he sees you, isn't it? Something he paid for, something he owns. The accuracy of that observation made her throat tight. She nodded. Then he'll look for a while. Send men, make threats, throw money at the problem. But when it becomes clear you're gone, really gone, not just hiding in the next town over, he'll tell himself you're dead. Easier on his pride that way. He can be the wronged party, the victim of tragedy, instead of the man whose wife ran because she'd rather die than stay. Elena refilled Eliza's cup. Kael's right. I've seen it before. Men like that need the story to make sense in a way that protects their sense of self. Admitting you chose freedom over him? That doesn't fit the story. Eliza wanted to believe them, but belief was dangerous. Hope was dangerous. Both had betrayed her before. They slept in shifts, each taking a turn at watch. When Kael woke Eliza for her turn in the small hours of the morning, she sat by the dying fire and watched the stars wheel overhead. The night was vast and quiet, broken only by the occasional call of an owl or the rustle of some small creature in the brush. She thought about Red Hollow, about Anna's kindness and Benjamin's defiance, about the canyon and the desert, and the impossible choice that had led her here, sitting by a fire with strangers who'd offered her safety without demanding anything in return. It felt wrong somehow, unearned, like a trap she wasn't clever enough to see. When dawn broke, they rode higher into the mountains. The air grew thin and cold, and Eliza found herself gasping for breath during the steeper climbs. But the country was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, all granite peaks and alpine meadows, with streams of snowmelt cutting through valleys thick with wildflowers. Around midday, they crested a ridge, and Kael pointed down into the valley beyond. There, that's home. Eliza looked. The settlement was small, perhaps 30 buildings scattered along the valley floor. They were built low and sturdy, constructed from timber and stone to withstand the mountain weather. Smoke rose from several chimneys. She could see people moving between the buildings, their forms tiny with distance. Garden plots stretched in neat rows, and livestock grazed in fenced pastures. It looked impossible. A pocket of civilization carved out of wilderness, hidden so completely that the world below had no idea it existed. How many people? Eliza asked. About 80, give or take. Mix of families and individuals. Some were born here. Some found us the way you did, running from something, looking for something, or just lost. Kale's horse shifted beneath him. We're careful about who we let stay. Can't be too careful when your whole existence depends on staying hidden. And if I don't fit, then we'll provision you and show you the trails that lead to settlements on the far side of the mountains. New towns, new territory, places where no one knows your face or your name. He glanced at her. But let's see how the next few weeks go first. They descended into the valley as the sun reached its zenith. People stopped what they were doing to watch them approach. Curiosity tempered with wariness. Eliza understood that look. These people had built something fragile and precious, and strangers represented risk. Kael led them to a building near the center of the settlement, larger than most. Inside, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes sat at a rough-hewn table, working through a stack of papers. She looked up when they entered. Kael, Elena, Thomas. Her gaze moved to Eliza. And a guest. Found her in the canyon, running from her husband, nearly dead from exposure. Kael pulled out a chair and sat. I offered her sanctuary. The woman set down her pen. Did you? She needs time to recover, to figure out what comes next. I told her we could provide that. You told her. The woman's tone was dry. And did it occur to you to consult with anyone before making promises on behalf of the community? Yes. I consulted with my conscience. It told me not to leave someone to die. A smile tugged at the corner of the woman's mouth. Your conscience? Of course. She turned to Eliza. I'm Margaret. I've been here longer than most, which means I get stuck with the administrative work no one else wants. What's your name? Eliza Harrow? And this husband you're running from, he dangerous? Yes. Rich? Yes. Influential? In certain circles, yes. Margaret drummed her fingers on the table. So if he comes looking, he'll bring money and men and probably the law, legitimate or otherwise. Probably. That's a significant risk you're asking us to absorb. Eliza straightened her shoulders, meeting Margaret's eyes. I didn't ask for anything. Kael offered. If you want me gone, point me in the right direction and I'll go. Just like that? Just like that. I've been making impossible choices for weeks now. One more won't kill me. Margaret studied her for a long moment, then looked at Kael. You vouching for her? I am. Even though you've known her for all of 12 hours? Even though. Margaret sighed. You're going to be insufferable about this, aren't you? Absolutely. Fine. She can stay. Temporarily. We'll see how things develop. Margaret turned back to Eliza. We're not a charity. Everyone here works. You'll be assigned tasks based on what you can do. You pull your weight, follow the rules, keep your mouth shut about our location if you ever leave. In exchange, you get food, shelter, and safety. Clear? Clear. Good. Elena, get her settled. Show her where the empty cabins are. And for the sake of all that's holy, get her a real meal. She looks like she's been living on air and spite. Elena grinned. Come on, I'll give you the tour. The cabin they assigned to Eliza was small but solid. One room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping platform, and a table with 2 chairs. Someone had left firewood stacked neatly by the hearth and blankets folded on the bed. The windows were small, designed to hold heat during winter, but they let in enough light to make the space feel less like a cave. Eliza set her pack down and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was straw, lumpy but clean. After sleeping on the ground for days, it felt like luxury. Elena leaned against the door frame. It's not much, but it's yours as long as you're here. Privy's out back. Well's in the center of the settlement. Meal hall's the big building near Margaret's office. Breakfast at dawn, dinner at dusk. You're expected to show up for both. What about work? We'll figure that out tomorrow. Today, you rest. You look like you're about 3 steps from collapse. Elena pushed off the frame. I'll bring you something to eat in an hour or so. Try not to die in the meantime. When she was gone, Eliza lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of voices and the wind moving through the pines. No doors slamming, no footsteps in the hall outside her locked room. No one coming to tell her what she'd done wrong this time, what punishment she'd earned. just silence, just space, just the strange, unfamiliar sensation of being alone without being trapped. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in longer than she could remember, slept without dreaming. When Eliza woke, the light slanting through the window told her it was late afternoon. Her body felt heavy, reluctant to move, like something fundamental had shifted while she slept. She sat up slowly, testing her limbs for soreness. Everything ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that came from pushing past limits and surviving. A covered plate sat on the table. She lifted the cloth to find cornbread, roasted vegetables, and something that looked like rabbit stew, still faintly warm. Her stomach growled. She ate standing by the window, watching people move through the settlement with the purposeful rhythm of a community that knew its routines. A knock at the door interrupted her third bite of cornbread. "It's open," she called. Cale stepped inside, ducking slightly under the doorframe. He'd changed out of his riding clothes into a plain wool shirt and canvas pants, but he still moved with that same quiet economy of motion. His eyes went to the plate in her hands. "Elena said you'd be hungry." She was right. Eliza set the plate down. "Thank you for the food, for all of it. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen what Margaret has planned for you tomorrow." He crossed to the window, looking out at the settlement. "She'll work you hard. Everyone here carries weight, no passengers." "I can work." "I believe you. Most people who make it this far have that kind of spine." He turned back to her. "But working here isn't like working in town. We do things differently, live differently, takes some adjustment." Eliza leaned against the table, studying him. "You're trying to tell me something. Just say it." "All right." Cale crossed his arms. "You're going to want to leave. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon. You'll wake up one morning and think you've rested enough, healed enough, and it's time to keep moving. Find a new town, a new name, disappear into some life where no one knows what you're running from. That's the plan, isn't it? You said I could leave whenever I wanted." "I did, and I meant it." His expression was unreadable. "But I'm asking you to stay longer than feels comfortable. Give it a month, maybe 2. Let your body actually recover. Let the trail go cold behind you. Give those men time to give up and go home. And if they don't give up, they will. Men like that always do eventually. The question is whether you give yourself enough time to outlast them." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You don't have to decide now. Just think about it." After he left, Eliza finished her meal and washed the plate in a basin by the door. The water was cold, pulled fresh from the well. She dried the plate with a scrap of cloth and set it back on the table, then stood in the middle of the cabin feeling unmoored. A month, 2 months. The idea felt impossible. She'd been running for so long that stopping felt like surrender. That night she lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. Wind in the pines, an owl hunting somewhere close, footsteps on the path outside as someone made late rounds. No locks on her door. No one standing guard to make sure she didn't try to escape. The freedom of it was almost worse than confinement. Morning came cold and bright. Eliza dressed in the same clothes she'd been wearing for over a week and stepped outside to find frost coating the grass. Her breath plumed in the thin air. Across the settlement, smoke rose from chimneys as people started their day. She found the meal hall by following the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Inside, long tables were packed with people eating and talking in low voices. The conversations died when she entered, replaced by that same wary curiosity she'd seen yesterday. Elena waved from a table near the back. "Over here." Eliza filled a plate from the serving line, eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, and made her way through the silence. She sat next to Elena and focused on her food, ignoring the stares. "They'll get used to you," Elena said quietly. "Give them time. We don't get many newcomers, and the ones we do get usually have complicated stories." "What's your story?" Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe I'll tell you sometime, when you've earned it." After breakfast, Margaret found her outside the meal hall. "You sleep all right?" "Better than I have in months." "Good. You'll need your strength. Come with me." Margaret led her to a large garden plot behind one of the storage buildings. The soil had been turned recently, dark and rich. A woman about Eliza's age stood near the fence, coiling rope. "This is Hannah," Margaret said. "She runs the gardens." "Hannah, this is Eliza. She's going to help you for a while." Hannah looked up, brushing dirt from her hands. She had red hair pulled back in a braid and freckles across her nose. Her expression was neutral, assessing. You know anything about growing food? Some. My mother had a kitchen garden. Then you know which end of a hoe to hold. That's a start. Hannah pointed to a shed near the fence. Tools are in there. We're planting winter crops today. Turnips, carrots, kale. I'll show you how deep, how far apart. After that, it's just repetition and calluses. Margaret nodded and left without another word. Eliza followed Hannah to the shed and took the hoe she was handed. The handle was smooth from years of use, the weight familiar in a way that made her chest tight. Her mother had died when Eliza was 14. The garden had died with her. They worked in silence for the first hour, Hannah demonstrating the spacing and depth, while Eliza followed behind, copying her movements. The work was hard but not complicated. Dig, plant, cover, move on. Her back began to ache. Blisters formed on her palms despite the calluses she'd built up during her flight. Around mid-morning, Hannah straightened and wiped her forehead. You're keeping up better than I expected. I'm motivated. Yeah? By what? Eliza drove the hoe into the ground. The alternative. Hannah studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. They broke for lunch, bread and cheese eaten sitting on the fence, and Hannah started talking. Not about anything important at first, just observations about the settlement, the people, the way things worked. But gradually, carefully, she worked her way around to questions. Margaret said you came up from the lowlands. That true? Yes. Long trip? Long enough. Hannah took a bite of bread, chewing slowly. Must have been bad, whatever you were running from. Eliza didn't answer. Sorry, that was too direct. Hannah crumpled the cloth her lunch had been wrapped in. I'm not good at subtle. My wife says I ask questions like I'm interrogating prisoners. Your wife? Sarah. She works in the forge with Thomas. You'll meet her eventually. She's impossible to miss. Tall, loud, always covered in soot. Hannah's smile was genuine this time. We've been together 6 years. Got married here, actually. Margaret officiated. Eliza tried to imagine it. A wedding in this hidden valley, people gathering to celebrate something as simple and profound as two people choosing each other. The image wouldn't quite form. It was too far from anything she'd known. That must be nice, she said finally. It is, most days. Hannah stood, brushing crumbs from her pants. Come on, we've got another few hours before the light goes. By the time they finished for the day, Eliza's hands were raw and her back screamed with every movement. But the garden rows were planted, neat and straight, and there was satisfaction in that. Proof that she could still do something useful, still contribute to something larger than her own survival. Hannah walked her back toward the cabins as the sun dropped behind the western peaks. You did good today. Really? I half expected you to quit after the first hour. Why would I quit? Because most people who show up here half dead don't bounce back that fast. They need weeks of rest before they're ready to work. But you? Hannah shook her head. You've got something driving you. I just hope it's not going to burn you out. Eliza thought about that as she washed in the cold water from her basin and changed into a spare shirt someone had left folded on her bed. Driving her? Maybe. Or maybe she just didn't know how to stop moving, even when movement wasn't required anymore. Dinner in the meal hall was louder than breakfast had been. People talked and laughed, passing dishes and sharing stories from their day. Eliza sat with Elena and Hannah and tried not to feel like an outsider. Kyle appeared halfway through the meal and dropped into the seat across from her. Heard you survived your first day with Hannah, he said. Barely. Hannah grinned. She's tough. I like her. High praise, Elena said. Hannah doesn't like most people. Most people are idiots. Eliza's got sense. Hannah stood, gathering her plate. I'm going to find my wife before she forgets to eat again. See you tomorrow, Eliza. Same time. After dinner, Kyle walked Eliza back to her cabin. The settlement was settling into its evening routine, lights appearing in windows, voices fading, the community pulling inward against the cold. You adjusting all right? Kyle asked. It's strange. All of it. Being here, being safe, not having to look over my shoulder every 5 minutes. Strange in a bad way? Eliza considered. No, just strange. They reached her cabin and stood outside in the gathering dark. The stars were beginning to appear overhead, sharper and brighter than she'd ever seen them in the lowlands. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Why did you bring me here? Really, You could have pointed me toward water and sent me on my way. Would have been safer for everyone. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. You reminded me of someone. My sister. She ran from a bad situation when I was younger, made it about 3 days before they caught her and dragged her back. His voice was flat, empty of inflection. She didn't survive the next year. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. Different place, different circumstances. But when I saw you in that canyon, half dead and still walking, he trailed off, then shook his head. I couldn't leave you. Simple as that. He left before she could respond, disappearing into the darkness between cabins. Eliza stood outside a moment longer, looking up at the stars, then went inside and built a fire against the cold. The days developed a rhythm. Wake before dawn, breakfast in the meal hall, work in the gardens with Hannah until the light failed. Dinner, sleep, repeat. It should have been monotonous, but instead it felt like something Eliza had been searching for without knowing it. Structure without cruelty, routine without imprisonment. Hannah proved to be exactly as advertised, blunt, impatient, and fiercely competent. She taught Eliza which plants could survive frost and which needed protection, how to read the soil for moisture and nutrients, how to identify pests before they destroyed a crop. The work was endless and exacting, but Hannah's standards were clear and her praise, when it came, was genuine. You're a natural at this, Hannah said one afternoon as they harvested the last of the summer squash. Better than half the people I've trained. My mother was a good teacher. She teach you anything else useful? How to keep my mouth shut and my head down. Hannah snorted. Well, you can forget that last part here. Margaret runs things, but she's not a tyrant. You've got opinions, you share them. You see something wrong, you say so. That's how we stay functional. Sarah, Hannah's wife, turned out to be everything Hannah had promised. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a voice that carried across the entire settlement when she got excited about something. She worked metal with the same intensity Hannah brought to gardening, and the two of them together were a study in complementary chaos. Eliza met her properly one evening when Hannah dragged her to the forge to see a new project Sarah was working on. Water pump, Sarah explained, gesturing at a complicated assembly of pipes and valves, trying to get the mechanism smooth enough that it doesn't require two people to operate. Here, hold this steady while I adjust the pressure valve. Eliza held the section of pipe while Sarah worked, listening to her explain the engineering with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for religion. When the pump finally worked, water flowing steadily with just one person operating the handle, Sarah let out a whoop that probably woke half the settlement. You're a genius, Hannah said, kissing her wife's soot-covered cheek. I know. Remind me more often. Walking back to her cabin that night, Eliza found herself smiling for no particular reason. Just the residual warmth of being around people who seemed genuinely happy, who'd built something together that mattered. 2 weeks into her stay, Margaret summoned her to the administrative building. Sit, Margaret said, not looking up from the ledger she was working on. I've been watching you. Hannah says you're competent. Elena says you're quiet, but not withdrawn. Kyle says you're stubborn as hell. He would know. Margaret smiled slightly. Yes, he would. Here's the situation. You're pulling your weight, following the rules, keeping your head down. That's good. But I need to know what your plans are. Are you staying? Are you leaving? Because if you're leaving, I need to start planning for that. And if you're staying, I need to know you're committed. Eliza shifted in her chair. I don't know yet. That's honest, at least. Margaret set down her pen. Let me be equally honest. We like you. You work hard, you don't cause problems, and you're not afraid to get your hands dirty. But this community survives on trust and commitment. I can't have people who are halfway out the door, always looking for the next escape route. It poisons the whole dynamic. I understand that. I'm just not sure I can make that promise yet. Fair enough. But here's what I need from you, a decision within the month. Stay or go. If you stay, you're all in. You contribute, you participate, you become part of what we're building here. If you go, we provision you properly, show you the routes out, and wish you well. But no more limbo. Clear? Clear. That night, Eliza sat by her fire and tried to imagine staying, putting down roots in this hidden valley, building a life that wasn't defined by fear or flight. The idea felt both appealing and impossible, like something that happened to other people in stories but never to her. The weather turned colder. The first real snow came in late October, dusting the peaks and turning the settlement into a study in white and gray. Eliza woke one morning to find ice on the inside of her windows and her breath visible even inside the cabin. She built up the fire and dressed in layers, then headed to breakfast through ankle-deep snow. Kyle caught her arm as she was leaving the meal hall. "You know how to ride a horse?" "A little. It's been years." "Good enough. Come with me." He led her to the stable, where Thomas was already saddling 2 horses. The older man grinned when he saw Eliza. "Heard you're getting promoted from garden work to scout duty." "News to me," Eliza said. Cale handed her a set of reins. "We're checking the perimeter, making sure the snow hasn't blocked any of the access routes. Could use an extra pair of eyes." The ride took them up into the high country, following trails that switchbacked through pine forests and across exposed ridges. The snow was deeper here, the horses breaking through crust with each step. Eliza's fingers went numb despite her gloves, and her face ached from the cold. But the view was incredible. From the highest point, she could see for miles in every direction, peaks marching away toward the horizon, valleys thick with forest, the settlement far below looking like a collection of toys. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Kyle said, pulling his horse alongside hers. "Yes. This is why we stay. Why we fight to keep this place hidden." He gestured toward the distant lowlands. "Down there, everything is bought and sold. Land, labor, people. But up here? This is ours. We built it with our own hands, and we protect it with our own lives if we have to." "You make it sound like a war." "It is a war, a quiet one, between people who think they can own everything and people who refuse to be owned." He looked at her. "You understand that better than most." They rode the perimeter for hours, checking trails and marking spots where avalanche danger was high. Thomas pointed out animal tracks, deer, elk, a mountain lion that had passed through recently. By the time they headed back, the sun was dropping and the temperature with it. That night, Margaret made an announcement at dinner. "We've got confirmation that a group of men passed through Red Hollow 3 weeks ago, asking about a woman matching Eliza's description. They moved on after a few days of searching, haven't been spotted since." The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Eliza. She set down her fork carefully. "Where did they go?" "South, according to our contacts. Back toward Grafton, most likely. Could mean they gave up. Could mean they're regrouping. Either way, it's information you should have." Eliza nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you for telling me." After dinner, she walked out to the edge of the settlement and stood looking down the valley. The moon was up, painting everything silver. She heard footsteps behind her but didn't turn. "They're not done looking," she said quietly. Cale stopped next to her. "Maybe not, but they're not looking here, and they won't find you unless you want to be found." "How can you be so sure?" "Because people have been trying to find this place for 20 years and failing. We're good at disappearing. It's kind of our specialty." Eliza wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "I can't stay here forever, hiding like a criminal." "Why not? What's waiting for you out there that's better than this?" She didn't have an answer for that. She'd spent so long focused on escape that she'd never thought about what came after, what a life without fear might actually look like. "Margaret wants a decision," she said. "I know. She told me." Cale turned to face her. "For what it's worth, I hope you stay. I think you could be happy here, given time. But that's not my choice to make. It's yours." The next few weeks were a blur of work and weather. The snow came harder, piling up in drifts that blocked doors and turned simple tasks into battles against the elements. Eliza learned to split firewood, to layer clothes for warmth, to navigate the settlement in near whiteout conditions. She also started to see the cracks in the community's surface. A dispute between 2 families over shared resources turned ugly. One night, voices raised in the meal hall until Margaret intervened with cold authority. A teenager ran away, only to be brought back half-frozen 2 days later. A woman went into labor early, the birth difficult and frightening, everyone holding their breath until the baby's cry finally came. These weren't perfect people living a perfect life. They were flawed and frightened and doing their best with limited resources in a harsh environment. But they were also resilient. They took care of each other. They showed up when it mattered. One evening, Hannah invited Eliza to dinner at her cabin. Sarah cooked, badly, according to Hannah, though the stew was perfectly edible, and they spent the evening talking about nothing in particular. Books they'd read, places they'd been, dreams they'd abandoned or held on to. Margaret says you have to decide soon, Hannah said as they cleared the dishes. About staying. I know. You going to? Stay? Yeah. Eliza dried a plate slowly. I don't know if I know how. Sarah, sprawled in a chair by the fire, laughed. No one knows how. You just do it. Wake up one day and decide that this is where you are. This is who you're with, and you're going to make it work. The rest is just details. Sarah makes everything sound simple, Hannah said. That's because most things are simple. People make them complicated because being complicated feels more important than being happy. Walking back to her cabin through the snow, Eliza thought about that. Being happy. It seemed like such a small, selfish thing to want. But maybe that was the point. Maybe happiness wasn't supposed to be grand or complicated. Maybe it was just this, a warm cabin, work that mattered, people who cared whether you lived or died. The month Margaret had given her was almost up when Kael found her in the gardens. It was early morning, the sun just cresting the eastern peaks, and Eliza was checking the cold frames where they'd planted winter greens. Can we talk? He asked. Sure. He sat on the edge of a planter box, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I know you've been thinking about Margaret's deadline, about whether to stay or go. Everyone seems to know about that. Small community, privacy is a fantasy. He picked up a handful of soil, letting it run through his fingers. I wanted to say something before you make your decision, something I probably should have said weeks ago. All right. I don't want you to leave. He said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. I know that's selfish. I know I have no claim on you, no right to ask you to stay for my sake, but I'm asking anyway. Eliza set down the watering can she'd been holding. Kael, let me finish, please. He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. When you showed up in that canyon, I saw someone fighting to survive. That was impressive. But these past weeks, I've seen something else. I've seen someone learning to live, learning to trust, to connect, to be part of something. And I think, he paused, searching for words. I think you could be extraordinary if you gave yourself the chance, if you stopped running long enough to see what you're capable of building. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you work until your hands bleed. I know you listen more than you talk. I know you're terrified of needing anyone, but you're starting to realize that maybe needing people isn't the same as being weak. He met her eyes. I know I want you to stay. The admission hung between them, honest and raw. Eliza felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the recognition of possibility, of a door opening that she'd thought was permanently sealed. I'll think about it, she said quietly. That's all I'm asking. That night, Eliza lay awake long after the settlement had gone dark. She thought about Charles, about the locked room, and the hunger and the absolute certainty that she would rather die than go back. She thought about the desert, about choosing possible death over certain capture. She thought about this valley, these people, this strange new life that had somehow assembled itself around her without her permission. And she thought about Kael's words, about being extraordinary, about building something. When morning came, she went to find Margaret. The administrative building was empty except for Margaret, who sat at her desk working through paperwork as always. I'll stay, Eliza said without preamble, if the offer's still open. Margaret set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. It is, but I need to hear you say the rest of it. I'll stay. I'll commit. I'll pull my weight and follow the rules and be part of this community. All in, like you said. And you understand what that means? That this becomes your home, your people, your responsibility? Yes. Margaret smiled, and for the first time, Eliza saw genuine warmth in it. Welcome home, then, officially. They shook hands across the desk, and Eliza felt the weight of the decision settle over her. Not like a burden, but like armor. Protection she'd chosen for herself. When she left the building, Kael was waiting outside. He didn't ask what she'd decided. He just looked at her, and whatever he saw in her face made him smile. Come on, he said. Hannah's going to want to hear this, and Sarah will probably insist on celebrating, which means burnt food and too much wine. Sounds perfect, Eliza said, and meant it. The celebration Sarah insisted on turned into an impromptu gathering that filled Hannah and Sarah's cabin past capacity. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else produced a jug of something that tasted like distilled fire, and within an hour, the whole thing had devolved into the kind of chaotic warmth Eliza had only ever witnessed from a distance. She found herself wedged between Elena and a woman named Ruth, who raised chickens and had opinions about everything. Across the room, Kael was deep in conversation with Thomas, both of them gesturing at something only they could see. Hannah sat on Sarah's lap near the fire, the two of them arguing cheerfully about whether the stew Sarah had made was actually edible or just cleverly disguised. "You look overwhelmed," Elena said, refilling Eliza's cup with whatever was in the jug. "I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. But that's all right. Most of us were terrible at this in the beginning, too." Elena took a sip from her own cup and winced. "Still don't know what Thomas puts in this stuff. Pretty sure it's illegal in 3 territories. "It's moonshine," Ruth said. "Obviously, though calling it that is generous. I've cleaned rust-off tools with weaker solutions." The music picked up tempo and people started dancing, if dancing was the right word for what amounted to enthusiastic stomping and spinning. Sarah pulled Hannah to her feet despite her protests, and they joined the chaos with the kind of unselfconscious joy that made Eliza's chest ache. Kael materialized next to her, offering his hand. "Dance? I don't know how. Neither does anyone else here. That's the point." She let him pull her into the makeshift dance floor, and for the next few minutes she stumbled through something that bore no resemblance to any dance she'd ever learned. Kael was patient, steering her away from collisions and laughing when she stepped on his feet for the 3rd time. "See?" he said when the music finally slowed. "Not so bad." "That's debatable." But she was smiling when she said it, and the weight she'd been carrying since Red Hollow felt lighter somehow. Not gone. She suspected it would never be fully gone, but manageable. The party broke up after midnight, people drifting back to their cabins in small groups. Kyle walked Eliza home through snow that crunched underfoot, the settlement quiet except for their footsteps. "Thank you," she said when they reached her door. "For what?" "For bringing me here, for not giving up on me when I was half dead in that canyon." She looked at him, this man who'd offered her survival, and then, impossibly, something more. "For seeing something in me worth saving." Kale's expression was serious. "I didn't save you, Eliza. You saved yourself. I just pointed you in the right direction." After he left, Eliza built up her fire and sat watching the flames. She thought about the word home and what it meant. Not a place you were born or a place you were trapped, but a place you chose. A place that chose you back. Winter settled in with brutal efficiency. The snow piled higher, the temperature dropped lower, and the settlement turned inward against the cold. Work became about survival, keeping fires burning, animals fed, pathways clear. Eliza learned to move through waist-deep drifts, to read the sky for incoming storms, to conserve energy for the tasks that mattered most. She also learned the settlement's history in pieces, gathered from conversations over meals and late-night talks by various firesides. Margaret had been one of the founders, arriving 23 years ago with a group of families fleeing religious persecution. Thomas had been a soldier who deserted rather than participate in what he called government-sanctioned murder against indigenous communities. Elena had run from an arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age. Everyone had a story. Everyone had fled something. And somehow, in this hidden valley, they'd built something that worked. One morning in late November, Eliza woke to the sound of shouting. She dressed quickly and ran outside to find half the settlement gathered near the eastern trail. Margaret stood at the center of the crowd, her face grave. "What's happening?" Eliza asked Hannah, who stood with Sarah near the back. "Tracks," Hannah said. "Someone found tracks coming up from the lowlands. Recent, maybe a day old. Could be nothing. Could be scouts." Eliza's stomach dropped. "How many?" 3 riders looks like. They stopped about a mile down, then turned back." Margaret's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "I want a full perimeter check. Kyle, Thomas, Elena, take your teams and sweep the approaches. Look for any sign they found the upper trails. Everyone else, normal routines but stay alert. We've handled this before. We'll handle it again." The crowd dispersed, people moving with the kind of controlled urgency that spoke to practice. Eliza started toward the gardens, but Kyle caught her arm. "Not today. You're with me. I don't know what I'm doing out there." "You'll learn. Come on." She followed him to the stable, where he was already saddling horses. Elena appeared a moment later with packs and rifles. The sight of the weapons made everything feel suddenly, dangerously real. "You know how to shoot?" Elena asked, handing Eliza a rifle. "No." "Then don't touch the trigger unless I tell you to. It's loaded, so treat it like it wants to kill you, because it does." They rode out in silence, Kyle leading them down a narrow trail that wound through dense forest. The snow was deeper here, untouched except for the tracks they were following. Eliza kept her eyes on the ground, trying to see what Kyle and Elena saw, the story written in disturbed snow and broken branches. After an hour, Kale stopped and dismounted. He crouched next to a spot where the tracks split, one set continuing down the mountain, the others circling back up. "They were looking for something," he said, "testing the approaches maybe, seeing if there's a way through." "Did they find one?" Eliza asked. "No, these upper trails are designed to look impassable. You have to know exactly where to go." He stood, brushing snow from his gloves. "But they were systematic about it. Whoever sent them knew what they were doing." Elena scanned the tree line. "Could be random. Hunters, trappers, prospectors. We get them sometimes." "Could be." Kale didn't sound convinced. "Let's keep moving. I want to see where they came from." They followed the tracks down to the edge of the high country, where the forest gave way to scrub and exposed rock. From there, they could see the lowlands stretching out below, a patchwork of settlements and ranches connected by dirt roads. "There," Elena pointed to a distant cluster of buildings. "That's Coldwater, closest town to our access points." Kale studied the settlement through a small telescope. "I see smoke, normal activity. No sign of a large group." "Doesn't mean anything. 3 riders could be staying anywhere." They watched for another half hour, but nothing moved that shouldn't. Eventually, Kyle collapsed the telescope and tucked it away. "We report back. Let Margaret decide what to do next." The ride back was tense, all of them scanning the forest for movement. Eliza's hands ached from gripping the rifle, and her nerves felt stripped raw. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made her jump. When they finally reached the settlement, Margaret was waiting in the administrative building with maps spread across her desk. "Well," she said without preamble. Kale described what they'd found: the systematic search pattern, the connection to Coldwater, the lack of any obvious camping spots or supply caches. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. "Could be coincidence," she said when he finished. "Could be someone's tracking rumors. Or could be your husband finally got smart and hired competent trackers." The last was directed at Eliza, who felt her face heat. "I'm sorry. If this is because of me—" "Don't." Margaret's voice was sharp. "We knew the risks when we took you in, and we've dealt with worse than 3 riders poking around our perimeter. The question is what we do about it." "We could send a message," Elena said. "Let them know we're aware of them. Make it clear they're not welcome." "Or we could do nothing," Thomas said from the doorway. No one had heard him enter. "Doing nothing has worked for 2 decades. Soon as we start making noise, we confirm we're here." Margaret tapped the map. "Thomas is right. Best case, they're random, and they'll move on. Worst case, they're looking for Eliza specifically, and they haven't found anything yet. Either way, engaging draws attention we don't need." "So we just wait?" Eliza asked. "We wait, we watch, we prepare." Margaret looked around the room. "Double the perimeter patrols, rotate teams every 6 hours. No one goes into the lowlands without my explicit permission. And Eliza, you stay in the settlement, no exceptions." Over the next week, the tension ratcheted up. Patrols reported no further signs of the riders, but the damage was done. The easy rhythm of the settlement had been disrupted, replaced by constant vigilance. People moved differently, talked differently, looked over their shoulders more often. Eliza threw herself into work, trying to be useful in a situation where she felt like the source of the problem. She helped Hannah winterize the last of the garden beds, assisted Sarah in the forge, took a shift in the communal kitchen preparing meals for the patrol teams. Anything to avoid sitting idle while others risked themselves for her safety. Kyle found her in the kitchen 3 days after their patrol, elbow deep in bread dough at an hour when most people were asleep. "You're going to exhaust yourself," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm fine." "You're not. You've barely slept since we found those tracks." Eliza punched the dough harder than necessary. "People are in danger because of me. The least I can do is make myself useful." Kale crossed the room and put his hand over hers, stopping the aggressive kneading. Listen to me. No one blames you for this. We've always known discovery was a possibility. We've planned for it. And if those riders were looking for you specifically, they failed. They found nothing. They're gone. You don't know that. No, I don't. But I know worrying yourself sick won't change anything. He released her hand. Come on, leave the bread. Walk with me. Kyle, please. She wiped flour from her hands and followed him outside. The settlement was dark except for scattered lights in windows and the glow from the guard posts at the perimeter. Snow had started falling again, light flakes that caught the moonlight. They walked in silence to the edge of the valley, where a small overlook gave a view of the western approaches. Kyle sat on a fallen log, brushing snow from the spot next to him. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. About people being in danger because of you. It's true. Maybe. But it's also true that you're in danger because of them, because you chose to trust us, to stay here, to become part of this community. That was a risk too. Eliza sat next to him, pulling her coat tighter against the cold. That's different. Is it? We all take risks for each other here. That's what community means. You protect me, I protect you, we all protect the whole. It's not a balance sheet where we tally up who owes what. It feels like I owe everything. Then pay it forward. Stay. Build something here. Help the next person who shows up half dead and terrified. He looked at her. You're not a debt to be settled, Eliza. You're an investment we're all making in each other. They sat in silence, watching the snow fall. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. I don't know how to do this, Eliza said quietly. How to be part of something without waiting for it to fall apart. No one does it first. You just keep showing up. Keep choosing it, day after day. Until one morning you realize you're not choosing anymore. You're just here, and here is where you want to be. Another week passed. The patrols reported nothing unusual. The tracks filled in with fresh snow and disappeared. Slowly, carefully, the settlement began to relax back into its routines. But Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. She'd lived too long under threat to trust peace when she found it. Every unexpected sound made her tense. Every stranger's face in her peripheral vision made her heart race, even though there were no strangers here. Hannah noticed during a morning in the gardens. They were harvesting root vegetables from the cold frames, working in the kind of companionable silence that had become normal between them. You're jumpy today, Hannah observed. I'm fine. You said that 3 times yesterday, too. Doesn't make it true. Hannah sat back on her heels. Talk to me. What's going on? Eliza focused on the carrots she was pulling. I keep thinking they're going to come back. Those riders. That they're going to bring more people, surround the settlement, drag me back to Charles. And if they do, then everyone here suffers because of me. Hannah was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? I think you're so used to being punished that you can't imagine a world where you're not. So you're punishing yourself preemptively to maintain some sense of control. That's not... It is, though. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop because every shoe you've ever known is dropped eventually. But Eliza? Hannah reached over and stilled her hands. Sometimes the shoe doesn't drop. Sometimes you just get to keep your shoes on and walk wherever you want. The simplicity of it made Eliza's throat tight. What if I don't know where I want to walk? Then you stand still for a while. Figure it out. We'll be right here when you're ready. That night, Eliza dreamed of Charles for the first time in weeks. In the dream, he stood in the middle of the settlement, perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, explaining to Margaret why she needed to hand Eliza over. And in the dream, Margaret was agreeing, nodding along, apologizing for the inconvenience. Eliza woke gasping, her cabin dark and freezing because the fire had gone out. She rebuilt it with shaking hands, then sat wrapped in blankets until dawn, unable to shake the feeling that the dream was a premonition. When she finally emerged for breakfast, she found the settlement in an uproar. People were gathered near the Eastern Trail again, but this time the mood was different. Not fear, but excitement. Eliza pushed through the crowd to find Kyle and Margaret standing over something on the ground. Not tracks this time, a person. The man was young, maybe 25, with frost in his beard and hypothermia turning his lips blue. He was conscious, but barely, his eyes unfocused and his breathing shallow. Found him just after dawn, one of the patrol members was saying. Half frozen, about 2 miles down. No horse, no supplies, just walking up the mountain like he knew where he was going. Get him inside, Margaret ordered. Sarah, bring blankets and hot water. Hannah, find Catherine and tell her we need her medical kit. Move. They carried the stranger to the meal hall and set him by the fire. Catherine, the settlement's closest thing to a doctor, arrived and took charge with brisk efficiency. Within minutes, she had him stripped of his frozen clothes and wrapped in warm blankets, forcing hot broth between his chattering teeth. Eliza stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. Something about the man nagged at her, but she couldn't place it. She'd never seen him before. She was certain of that. When he finally warmed enough to speak, his first words were, "I'm looking for Eliza Harrow." The room went silent. Every eye turned to her. Margaret's voice was ice. "Who sent you?" The man's eyes found Eliza through the crowd. "No one sent me. I came on my own. I have a message from Anna Chen in Red Hollow." The name hit Eliza like a physical blow. Anna, who'd fed her and equipped her for the desert. Anna, who'd given her a chance when she had nothing. "What message?" Eliza's voice came out hoarse. "She said to tell you they're coming. A group of men, well-funded and organized. They've been tracking you for months, and they're getting close. Anna heard about it from a supply runner who passed through Coldwater last week. She sent me to warn you." "Why?" Margaret demanded. "Why would she risk exposing us?" "Because she said Eliza deserved to know what's coming, and because—" He hesitated, looking directly at Eliza. "She said to tell you that you're not property, and you never were, and she'll be damned if she lets them take you back without a fight." Eliza's vision blurred. She blinked hard, forcing back tears. Cale stepped forward. "How many men? When are they coming?" "I don't know exactly. Anna said at least 6, maybe more. They're outfitting in Coldwater now, hiring guides who know the mountains. Could be days, could be weeks." Margaret turned to address the room. "Everyone out except the council. Now." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, people casting worried glances back as they left. Eliza moved to follow, but Margaret caught her arm. "You stay." When the room had cleared except for Margaret, Kyle, Thomas, Elena, and a handful of others Eliza recognized as community leaders, Margaret gestured for the stranger to continue. "Tell us everything Anna told you. Don't leave anything out." The man, whose name was Daniel, had been a drifter passing through Red Hollow when Anna had approached him. She'd offered him money and supplies to make the journey into the mountains with one simple task: find the hidden settlement and deliver her warning. She said people talk about this place in whispers, a ghost town in the high country where people disappear to when they don't want to be found. Took me 2 weeks of asking questions and following rumors before I found trails that looked promising. "And you just walked up?" Thomas's voice was skeptical. "No resistance? No obstacles?" "I nearly froze to death 3 times and got lost for 4 days. I'd call that resistance." Daniel pulled the blanket tighter. "But yes, eventually I found my way. Your trails aren't as hidden as you think. Or maybe I just got lucky." Margaret's expression was grim. "Neither option is comforting. Kyle, what's your assessment? If he found us, others can too, especially if they're organized and funded. We've been lucky so far, but luck runs out." He looked at Eliza. "They're not giving up. This isn't going away." The words hung heavy in the air. Eliza felt the weight of all those eyes on her, the unspoken question in every face. "What do we do about her?" "I'll leave," she said. "Tonight, if you want. I'll take supplies and head for the far side of the mountains. They won't have any reason to come here if I'm gone." "Absolutely not," Kale said. "It's the smart play. It's suicide, and you know it. Winter in the high passes will kill you faster than any hired tracker." Margaret raised a hand for silence. "Let's think this through logically. We have a few options. 1, we send Eliza away and hope the trackers follow. 2, we hide her here and try to misdirect any search parties. 3, we abandon the settlement entirely and relocate." "Abandon?" Elena's voice rose. "We've built this place for 20 years. You're talking about walking away from everything." "I'm talking about survival. This community exists because we stay hidden. If that's no longer possible, we adapt or we die." Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the settlement. There's a fourth option. We make a stand. Let them come, and we send them back down the mountain in pieces. That's murder, Catherine said quietly. That's defense. There's a difference. Margaret rubbed her temples. We're not making any decisions tonight. Daniel, you'll stay here until you're recovered, then we'll decide what to do with you. Everyone else, think about what you've heard. We'll meet again tomorrow after people have had time to process. Eliza, you're not going anywhere. That's not negotiable. The meeting broke up, people drifting away in small groups, voices low and urgent. Eliza stood frozen in the middle of the room, feeling like the eye of a storm. Kael appeared at her elbow. Come on, let's get some air. They walked to the overlook again, the same spot they'd sat weeks before. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. It should have been beautiful, but Eliza couldn't see past the disaster she'd brought down on these people. This is my fault, she said. It's Charles's fault. Don't take ownership of his choices. But I brought it here. I led them here. You survived. That's not the same thing. Kael turned to face her. Listen to me. Whatever the council decides, whatever happens next, I want you to know something. I don't regret bringing you here, not for a second. Even if this all goes to hell, even if we have to leave everything behind, you were worth it. How can you say that? Because it's true. Because you're proof that this place works, that what we built here matters. You came to us broken and terrified, and look at you now. You're strong, you're whole, you belong. That's not nothing, Eliza. That's everything. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his certainty fill the hollow spaces inside her where doubt lived. But the fear was too strong, too practiced. What if Margaret decides I have to go? Then we fight that decision together. But I don't think she will. Margaret's practical, but she's not cruel. She knows what sending you out in winter would mean. They sat in silence as the last light faded and stars began to appear. Somewhere in the settlement, someone was playing that fiddle again, the music carrying thin and clear through the cold air. I'm afraid, Eliza admitted, of them finding me, of Charles winning, of losing this. She gestured at the settlement below. All of this. Fear's not weakness, it's information. It tells you what you value, what you'd fight for. Kael stood and offered his hand. Come on, let's go get some dinner. Face whatever comes next on a full stomach. The next day's council meeting was longer and more contentious. Arguments flew about responsibility, risk, principle, and practicality. Some voices argued for Eliza's departure. Others insisted the settlement's whole purpose was protecting people like her. A few suggested fortifying their position and preparing for conflict. Margaret let them argue themselves out before speaking. Here's what we're going to do. We're not abandoning the settlement. We're not sending Eliza away. And we're not starting a war. What we are going to do is prepare. We strengthen our defenses, improve our early warning systems, and establish evacuation protocols in case we need them. Kael, you and Thomas will lead that effort. We also send scouts to Coldwater to gather intelligence. I want to know exactly who these men are, what they're capable of, and what their timeline looks like. Elena, that's yours. Finally, we make it clear to anyone who might talk that this place doesn't exist. We remind our contacts in the lowlands that discretion keeps everyone safe. Any questions? There were none. The plan was solid, if not perfect. More importantly, it gave people something to do besides worry. Over the next 2 weeks, the settlement transformed. Hidden caches of supplies appeared at strategic points along evacuation routes. Guard rotations intensified. Children were taught what to do if strangers appeared. The whole community moved with quiet, determined purpose. Eliza worked alongside everyone else, no longer sidelined. She helped Sarah forge additional tools and weapons. She assisted in moving supplies to the caches. She learned basic first aid from Catherine and basic tactics from Thomas. And slowly, something inside her changed. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer paralyzed her. She'd spent so long being hunted that she'd forgotten she could fight back. One evening, Kael found her practicing with a rifle under Elena's supervision. You're getting better, he observed. I'm getting less terrible. There's a difference. Eliza lowered the rifle. But at least now if someone comes for me, I won't be helpless. You were never helpless, just unprepared. He gestured toward the targets. Mind if I watch? She did mind, actually, but she lined up the shot anyway. The rifle kicked against her shoulder and the target shuddered but didn't fall. "Close," Elena said, "but you're still anticipating the recoil. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull it." They practiced until full dark, until Eliza's shoulder ached and her hands shook from cold and fatigue. But her last 3 shots all hit the target dead center, and the satisfaction of that was worth every bruise. Walking back with Kael afterward, Eliza felt something settle into place. A sense of agency she'd thought Charles had beaten out of her permanently. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not treating me like I'm fragile. For expecting me to be strong instead of assuming I'll break." Kael smiled. "You're the least fragile person I know. You just needed time to remember that." The news came 3 weeks later, delivered by Elena, who'd ridden down to Coldwater disguised as a supply trader. She returned just after dark, her horse lathered despite the cold, and went straight to Margaret's office without stopping to warm herself. Eliza was in the mule hall when the summons came. A runner appeared at her table, breathless. "Margaret wants you, now." She found the council already assembled, Elena still in her snow-crusted coat, her face drawn. Margaret gestured Eliza to a chair. "Tell her what you told us," Margaret said. Elena poured herself coffee with hands that shook slightly from cold or exhaustion. "They're in Coldwater. 8 men, well-armed and well-funded. They've hired 2 local guides who claim to know routes into the high country. One of them is a former trapper who worked these mountains before we settled here." "Does he know about us?" Kael asked. "I don't think so. But he knows the geography, knows which valleys are viable for settlement, knows where water sources are." Elena took a long drink. "They're asking questions, showing a sketch of Eliza to anyone who'll look, offering money for information." "A sketch?" Thomas leaned forward. "From memory or from life?" "From life, looks like. Detailed enough that anyone who knows her would recognize her." Elena pulled a folded paper from her coat and smoothed it on the table. Eliza stared at her own face rendered in charcoal. It was a good likeness, probably drawn from one of the formal portraits Charles had commissioned during their marriage. She looked younger in the sketch, more polished, her hair arranged in the style Charles had preferred. A stranger wearing her face. "They're planning to move in 4 days," Elena continued, "waiting for a storm to pass, then heading up. The guides are confident they can find traces of habitation if any exists. They're talking about a 2-week expedition, fully provisioned." Margaret's fingers drummed the table. 4 days. That gives us some time, but not much. How many people in Coldwater know they're looking? Half the town by now. They're not being subtle about it. Elena's expression was grim. "There's also a bounty. $500 for verified information leading to Eliza's recovery." The room went quiet. $500 was a fortune in a town like Coldwater. Life-changing money for most people. "Someone will talk," Thomas said flatly. "That much money. Someone always talks." "Maybe." Margaret looked at Eliza. "How are you holding up?" The question surprised her. "I'm all right." "That's not what I asked." Eliza met Margaret's eyes. "I'm terrified, but I'm also angry, and I'm tired of running." "Good. We're going to need that anger." Margaret stood and walked to the wall where a large map of the territory hung. "Here's what we're going to do. We evacuate." "What?" Kael's voice was sharp. "You said we weren't abandoning the settlement." "I said we weren't abandoning it permanently. This is different. We're moving everyone to the Northern Highlands temporarily, to the winter camps we use during heavy snow years. It's 3 days travel, rough terrain, but defensible and completely hidden. We've got supplies cached there already." Elena studied the map. "You're planning to let them find this place empty." "Exactly. They come, they search, they find evidence of habitation, but nothing current. Maybe some old structures, cold fire pits, signs that people lived here once but moved on. They conclude we scattered years ago or died out or never existed in the numbers the rumors suggested. They go home disappointed." "And if they don't buy it," Thomas asked, "then we're already somewhere they'll never find us, and we wait them out. Winter in the Northern Highlands is brutal. They won't last more than a few weeks up there, even with the best supplies. Eventually, they'll have to retreat." Kael shook his head. "You're talking about uprooting 80 people in the middle of winter, families with children, elderly folks, livestock. That's a massive undertaking." "Yes, it is, which is why we start tomorrow." Margaret's tone left no room for argument. "We move in stages. First the vulnerable populations, then supplies, then the rest. We leave minimal traces, make it look abandoned gradually rather than suddenly. And we do it all before those men start up the mountain. The next morning, the settlement woke to organized chaos. Margaret had divided everyone into groups based on capability and need. The elderly and the very young went first, bundled into wagons with basic supplies and escorted by armed riders. They'd make slow progress, but they had the longest journey ahead of them. Eliza found herself assigned to the supply detail, helping to pack food, tools, and essential equipment onto pack animals. The work was backbreaking and endless. Every item had to be evaluated, critical, important, or expendable. The critical items went north. The important items got cached in hidden locations for later retrieval. The expendable items stayed behind, arranged to look like a settlement that had slowly deteriorated rather than been deliberately abandoned. Hannah worked alongside her, directing the packing with the same efficiency she brought to everything. Seed stores in the waterproof crates, tools wrapped in oilcloth. Stop looking so miserable. We've done this before. You have? Not exactly like this, but similar. A few years back, we had a scare with a military patrol getting too close. We cleared out for 3 weeks, came back when they moved on. Hannah hefted a crate of preserves. It's inconvenient and exhausting, but it works. That's the thing about staying hidden. Sometimes you have to become a ghost. By the second day, the settlement looked different. Still inhabited, but threadbare. Houses stood with doors ajar, fire pits cold, the kind of neglect that spoke to gradual abandonment rather than flight. Margaret supervised every detail personally, her critical eye catching anything that looked too intentional. Make it messy, she instructed. Leave some supplies scattered, some tools broken. People who leave in a hurry don't pack everything neatly. Cale appeared at Eliza's elbow as she was loading the last of the medical supplies. Margaret wants you in the second-to-last group. You'll travel with me and Thomas. Why not the last group? Because the last group is Margaret and the scouts. They're staying behind to watch, make sure the deception holds. He touched her arm briefly. Don't argue. This isn't negotiable. The third day, Eliza woke before dawn to find frost coating everything, turning the settlement into something crystalline and unreal. She packed her few belongings, the clothes someone had given her, the knife that had traveled with her from Red Hollow, a scarf Hannah had knitted during one of their evening talks. Everything she owned fit in one small pack. She walked through the empty settlement as the sun rose, saying goodbye to a place that had become home. The cabin where she'd slept that first night, the gardens where she'd worked alongside Hannah, the overlook where Kael had promised her she was worth the risk. All of it would be here when they returned, but it would be different somehow, changed by the knowledge that it could be taken away. Elena found her standing outside the meal hall. Ready? No, but I don't think that matters. It doesn't. Come on, we're moving out in 20 minutes. The journey north was hard in ways that had nothing to do with physical exertion. They traveled through terrain that seemed designed to break spirits, narrow defiles where wind screamed through gaps in the rock, exposed ridges where one wrong step meant a fatal fall, forests so dense with snow-laden branches that progress was measured in yards rather than miles. The group Eliza traveled with consisted of about 15 people, mostly adults in their prime working years. They moved fast and light, pausing only briefly to rest the horses and check their direction. Kael led, his knowledge of the high country proving invaluable as he guided them through passages Eliza would have sworn were impassable. On the second night, they made camp in a shallow cave, huddling around a carefully shielded fire. The temperature had dropped brutally, and even wrapped in every layer she owned, Eliza couldn't stop shivering. Thomas produced a flask and passed it around. Drink. It'll warm you from the inside. The liquor burned going down, but he was right. Heat bloomed in her chest and spread outward. She passed the flask to Kael, who took a swallow and grimaced. I swear Thomas makes this stuff worse every year just to prove he can, Kael said. It's medicinal, Thomas replied, sounding offended. You're supposed to respect it, not enjoy it. Despite everything, people laughed. The sound was strange in the frozen darkness, but it felt necessary. A reminder that they were still human, still capable of finding humor in misery. Eliza watched them around the fire, Sarah making some point with wild hand gestures, Elena cleaning her rifle with meticulous care. Daniel, the messenger, sitting slightly apart but listening intently. These people had uprooted their lives because of her. because protecting one of their own mattered more than comfort or convenience. The weight of that realization pressed on her chest harder than the cold. Kael noticed her expression. Stop it. Stop what? Whatever you're doing in your head right now, the guilt spiral. I can see it from here. I wasn't. You were. And you need to stop. He shifted closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. We chose this. All of us. We knew what staying meant, what the risks were. You don't get to take responsibility for our choices. But if I hadn't come, then you'd be dead in the desert or back with Charles. Probably dead either way. His voice was gentle but firm. You survived. We helped. That's not a transaction where you owe us eternal guilt. That's just what people do when they give a damn about each other. Before she could respond, Elena called out, Kael, you seen this? He moved to join her at the cave entrance. Eliza followed. In the distance, back the way they'd come, a faint orange glow lit the horizon. Fire, Thomas said, appearing beside them. Big one, from the look of it. That's the valley, Kael said slowly. That's where the settlement is. The group fell silent, everyone staring at that distant glow. Eliza's stomach twisted. Did we leave something burning? No, we were meticulous about that. Elena's jaw was tight. Someone set that fire. Question is who and why. They debated sending scouts back, but Thomas argued against it. If those trackers found the place and torched it, they're probably still there. Walking into that is suicide. We wait for Margaret's group to catch up, see what they know. The rest of the night passed with agonizing slowness. Eliza couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about everything they'd left behind going up in flames. The homes people had built with their own hands, the gardens they'd tended for years. All of it reduced to ash and charred timber. Margaret's group caught up to them the following afternoon, riding hard. Her face was grim as she dismounted. The trackers reached the settlement yesterday evening, she said without preamble. 8 men plus the 2 guides, just like Elena reported. They searched every building, found it empty, started arguing about whether we'd been tipped off or just moved on naturally. And the fire? Kael asked. One of them got angry, started smashing things, knocked over a lamp. The fire spread fast with everything so dry from winter. Margaret's expression was carved from stone. They tried to put it out at first, then gave up and watched it burn. I heard one of them say, it didn't matter since there was nothing worth saving anyway. How much is gone? Hannah's voice was small. Maybe 1/3 of the structures. The meal hall, several cabins, one of the storage buildings. Margaret looked around at the assembled group. It could have been worse. Could have been everything, but it's bad enough. Someone started crying. Others stood in shocked silence. The settlement had been more than buildings. It had been proof that they could survive, that they could build something permanent in a world that wanted them erased. Did they leave? Elena asked. This morning. Seemed satisfied that the place was abandoned, headed back down the mountain arguing about who was going to tell their employer they'd failed. Margaret pulled off her gloves. They're gone, for now. But this isn't over. That night, camped in the northern highlands, Margaret called everyone together. The winter camp was less a settlement and more a collection of sturdy shelters built into natural caves and rock formations. It was defensible and well supplied, but it was also cramped and cold and nothing like the home they'd left behind. I know everyone's exhausted and scared and angry, Margaret began. I know we've lost things that mattered, but we're alive, we're together, and we're going to survive this. For how long? Someone called out. How long do we hide up here in the cold? Until it's safe. Could be weeks, could be months. I don't have a better answer than that. Margaret's gaze swept the crowd. But I need everyone to understand something. This isn't just about Eliza anymore. Those men burned our home. They proved that even abandoned, even empty, what we've built is a threat to them. Because it represents possibility. The possibility that people can exist outside their control. She paused, letting that sink in. So yes, we're hiding, but we're also preparing. When we go back, and we will go back, we're going to rebuild stronger, smarter, with better defenses and better warning systems. And the next time someone comes looking for one of ours, they'll find exactly nothing except a community that knows how to protect itself. The speech helped, though Eliza suspected its effect was temporary. People dispersed to their assigned shelters, and she found herself sharing a small cave with Hannah, Sarah, and 3 others. The sleeping arrangements were tight. Everyone rolled in blankets on the stone floor, but the body heat helped against the cold. Hannah lay next to her in the darkness. "You all right?" "I don't know how to answer that." "Fair enough." A pause. "For what it's worth, I don't blame you. None of us do. Some of you must." "Why would we?" "You didn't set the fire. You didn't come hunting yourself. You just survived, and that made some powerful man angry." Hannah shifted, finding a more comfortable position on the hard ground. "If we started blaming people for making powerful men angry, half of us would be guilty, including me." "What did you do?" "Refused to marry the man my father picked. Ran away instead. Ended up here eventually." Hannah's voice was matter-of-fact. "Point is, we've all got our stories. Yours isn't special. It's just current." The next days fell into a new rhythm, harder than before but functional. People divided into work groups. Some focused on fortifying the winter camp, others on hunting and gathering to supplement their cached supplies, still others on planning the eventual return to the valley. Eliza threw herself into whatever task needed doing, trying to be useful in a situation where she felt fundamentally useless. Cale found her one afternoon hauling firewood, her arms full of split logs. "You're going to hurt yourself." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted. When's the last time you slept a full night?" Eliza set down the wood. "I don't know. What difference does it make?" "The difference is you're running yourself into the ground and it's not helping anyone." He took the axe from her hands before she could protest. "Go rest. That's not a suggestion." "I can't just sit around while everyone else works." "You're not sitting around. You're recovering. There's a difference." Cale's expression softened. "You've been operating on fear and guilt for so long, you don't know how to stop. But you need to stop, Eliza, before you break something that can't be fixed." She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion hit her all at once, making her sway on her feet. Kyle steadied her with a hand on her arm. "Come on, I'll walk you back." In the shelter, she collapsed onto her blankets and fell asleep immediately. She slept for 14 hours straight, waking disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness with no idea where she was or how she'd gotten there. Hannah's voice came from nearby. "About time. You were starting to worry me." "How long?" "All night and most of yesterday evening. Kyle came by twice to check on you, told everyone to let you sleep." Hannah handed her a cup of something hot. "Drink this. It's not good, but it's warm." The liquid tasted like boiled bark, but it was indeed warm. Eliza drank it while Hannah updated her on the camp news. A successful hunting party had brought back 2 deer. Someone had figured out how to improve the ventilation in the largest shelter. Daniel the messenger had volunteered to make another run to Red Hollow to check on Anna. "Margaret's considering it," Hannah said. "We could use updated intelligence on what those trackers are saying, whether they're planning another attempt." "It's risky. Everything's risky now. At least Daniel knows the routes." Over the following week, something shifted in Eliza. The forced rest had given her perspective, distance from the immediate panic. She began to see the situation not as a disaster she'd caused, but as a problem that needed solving. And problems, unlike guilt, could be addressed with planning and action. She approached Margaret one evening after the meal. "I want to help with the security planning." Margaret looked up from the maps she was studying. "Why?" "Because I know Charles. Know how he thinks, how he operates. That might be useful." "It might, or it might just hurt." Margaret gestured to a seat. "But all right, tell me what you know." Eliza thought carefully before speaking. "Charles doesn't give up easily, but he's also not reckless. He'll see the burned settlement as confirmation that I'm gone, dead or moved on, doesn't matter which. His pride is satisfied either way because he can tell himself the problem resolved itself." "You sound certain." "I am. Charles cares about appearances and control. A wife who ran away makes him look weak. A wife who died or disappeared into the wilderness? That's tragic, not shameful. He can play the grieving widower, maintain his reputation." Margaret nodded slowly. "That tracks with what Elena heard in Coldwater. The men were already talking about abandoning the search before they found the settlement. Then the fire probably sealed it. They can go back and report they found evidence of habitation, but it was old and abandoned. Maybe tell Charles the first probably died in the desert, and the settlement was just a dead end." Eliza met Margaret's eyes. "He'll believe it because he wants to, because the alternative means admitting I chose death over him, and his ego can't handle that. So you think we're safe? They won't come back? I think we have time. Months, maybe longer. But eventually someone else will hear the rumors, get curious, come looking. This place was always living on borrowed time. The fire just accelerated the timeline. Margaret leaned back in her chair. You've been thinking about this. I haven't been able to think about anything else. And what conclusions have you reached? Eliza chose her words carefully. That hiding isn't sustainable long term. That we need to either disappear so completely no one can ever find us, or we need to establish ourselves as legitimate in a way that makes us untouchable. The second option means going public, registering with territorial authorities, paying taxes, submitting to outside oversight. Margaret's voice was flat. Most people here came to avoid exactly that kind of entanglement. I know. I'm not saying it's a good option, just that it's an option. They talked for another hour, exploring possibilities and discarding most of them as impractical. When Eliza finally left, her head hurt from the complexity of it all, but she also felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Useful. Kale was waiting outside the shelter. How'd it go? We didn't solve anything, but at least I'm thinking about solutions instead of just drowning in guilt. That's progress. He fell into step beside her. Walk with me? I want to show you something. He led her to the eastern edge of the camp where a narrow trail climbed to a rocky outcropping. The climb was steep, and Eliza's breath came hard in the thin air, but when they reached the top, the view stole what little breath she had left. The mountain stretched endlessly in every direction, peak after peak, marching toward horizons she couldn't see. The sky was vast and clear, stars beginning to appear as twilight deepened. It was beautiful and terrible at once, a landscape that didn't care whether humans survived in it or not. I come up here when I need perspective, Kyle said. Reminds me how small we are, how all our problems, no matter how big they feel, are just tiny moments in a world that's been here longer than we can imagine. Is that supposed to be comforting? Depends on the day. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it just makes me feel insignificant. He sat on a flat rock and Eliza joined him. But it also reminds me that we get to choose what matters. The mountains don't care about Charles or the trackers or whether our settlement burns. But we care. And that caring, that choosing to fight for what we've built, that's the only thing that makes any of this mean something. They sat in silence, watching the stars emerge. Eliza thought about choices, all the ones she'd made, all the ones she'd had stolen from her, all the ones still ahead. Running from Charles had been a choice. Walking into the desert had been a choice. Staying in this settlement with these people had been a choice. And sitting here on this frozen mountain next to a man who'd offered her safety and then impossibly something more, that was a choice too. Kyle, she said quietly. Yeah? Thank you for everything, for seeing me as more than just a problem to solve. You were never a problem. He looked at her, his expression serious. You were a person who needed help. That's different. Is it? Yes. Problems are obstacles. People are possibilities. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. And you? You're full of possibilities I'd like to see. The admission hung between them, careful and honest. Eliza felt her heart beat faster, felt the pull of something she'd thought was dead inside her, the ability to want something that wasn't just survival. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she said. For what? Whatever this is, whatever it could be. I'm still figuring out how to be myself without fear. Adding someone else into that seems... She trailed off, searching for words. Complicated? Terrifying. Kale nodded. I understand. And I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm just telling you that whenever you are ready, if you are ready, I'll be here. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility. They walked back to camp in comfortable silence, and for the first time since the fire, Eliza felt something other than guilt or fear. She felt hope. The hope lasted exactly 3 days before reality reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. Daniel returned from Red Hollow looking worse than when he'd first stumbled into the settlement half frozen. Margaret took one look at his face and called an emergency council meeting. Eliza wasn't invited, but Hannah came to find her an hour later, her expression tight. You need to hear this, Hannah said. The council chamber, really just the largest cave with enough space for everyone to crowd in, was packed. Daniel stood near the front, still in his travel clothes, dirt and exhaustion written across every line of his body. "Tell them what you told me," Margaret said. Daniel's voice was hoarse. "Anna's dead, murdered 3 days after I left Red Hollow. Someone broke into her boarding house at night, killed her in her sleep, made it look like a robbery, but nothing was actually taken." The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. Anna, who'd fed her and equipped her and sent Daniel with a warning. Anna, who'd said she'd be damned if she let them take Eliza back without a fight. Dead because she'd helped someone she barely knew. "There's more," Daniel continued. "The tracker who was leading the search, a man named Marcus Drummond, he's been asking questions about who might have helped Eliza leave town, offering money for information. Someone must have talked, mentioned Anna. Marcus. Of course it was Marcus. Charles's enforcer, the man who'd broken her ribs and locked her in that room. The man who'd chased her all the way to Red Hollow and then into the desert beyond. "They know she helped me," Eliza said, her voice distant to her own ears. "They killed her to send a message." "Or to tie up loose ends," Thomas said grimly. "Dead women don't talk to law enforcement or curious journalists. Makes the whole thing cleaner for everyone involved." Margaret's face was carved from granite. "This changes things. We thought we were dealing with hired trackers looking for a runaway wife. But murder? That's a different calculation entirely." "Charles wouldn't have ordered that," Eliza said. But even as she spoke the words, doubt crept in. Would he? She thought she knew the limits of his cruelty, but maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe there were no limits, only levels she hadn't yet discovered. "Doesn't matter if he ordered it or if his men took initiative," Kyle said. "The result is the same. They're willing to kill to get what they want." Elena leaned against the cave wall, her arms crossed. "So what do we do? Keep hiding? Wait for them to kill everyone who might know where we are?" "We don't have a lot of options," Margaret said. "Going to the law is pointless. Charles has money and influence. He can afford better lawyers, better connections. It would be our word against his, and we're a community of people who technically don't exist in any legal registry." "Then we make ourselves exist," Eliza said. The idea had been forming since her conversation with Margaret days ago, but Anna's death crystallized it into something sharp and necessary. "We register the settlement officially, file for incorporation as a township, establish legal residency for everyone here, make ourselves visible." "That's insane," someone said from the back. "Maybe, but it's also the only way to stop running." Eliza stood, facing the assembled council. "As long as we're hidden, we're vulnerable. Anyone can come after us, and who's going to care? We're ghosts, shadows, people who don't exist. But if we're a legitimate settlement with legal recognition, we're harder to erase." Thomas shook his head. "Legal recognition means taxes, oversight, regulations. It means giving up the autonomy that's kept us safe for 20 years. It also means protection," Kyle said slowly. "It means if someone comes after one of us, there's recourse, records, accountability." The argument raged for hours, voices rising and falling as people debated the merits of visibility versus secrecy. Eliza listened more than she spoke, aware that this was ultimately not her decision to make. These people had built this community long before she arrived. They deserved to choose its future. Finally, Margaret called for a vote. "All in favor of pursuing legal incorporation and registration?" Hands rose. Not all of them, not even most of them. But enough. Margaret counted twice to be sure, then nodded. "Motion carries. We'll send a delegation to the territorial capital to begin the process. It'll take months, maybe longer. In the meantime, we continue as we have been, cautious, prepared, together." The meeting dispersed, people leaving in small groups, their conversations urgent and worried. Eliza remained seated, staring at her hands. Anna was dead, because of her. No matter how the council rationalized it, that fact remained. Kale sat down next to her. "This isn't your fault." "How is it not? She helped me and they killed her for it. They killed her because they're monsters. That's on them, not you." He waited until she looked at him. "You can't control what other people do with their evil. You can only control what you do with it. And right now what you're doing is making sure her death meant something, making sure we build something that can't be torn down by men like Charles. And if we fail, then we fail. But at least we'll have tried." He stood and offered his hand. "Come on. We've got work to do." The work of incorporating a settlement that had existed in legal limbo for 20 years proved to be exactly as complicated as everyone had feared. Forms needed filing, surveys needed conducting, proof of habitation and land use needed documenting. Margaret assembled a delegation, herself, Elena, Thomas, and surprisingly, Eliza. "You're the reason we're doing this," Margaret said when Eliza protested. "And your testimony about what you're running from, what Charles is capable of, might be valuable if anyone questions why we've stayed hidden this long." They left for the territorial capital in early spring, when the mountain passes had finally cleared enough for safe travel. The settlement had moved back to the valley by then, the burned structures cleared away and rebuilding already underway. People worked with grim determination, raising new walls and planting new gardens, reclaiming what had been taken from them. The capital was a shock after months in the mountains. Too many people, too much noise, buildings stacked on top of each other like they were trying to escape the earth entirely. Eliza felt exposed walking those streets, certain that every face was a potential threat, every stranger someone who might recognize her. But no one did. She was just another woman in work clothes and a worn coat, unremarkable in a city full of unremarkable people. The sketch Marcus had shown around Red Hollow was useless here, where thousands of women fit that basic description. They stayed in a boarding house on the edge of the government district and spent their days navigating bureaucracy. Clerks who needed forms filled out in triplicate. Officials who needed bribes disguised as filing fees. Lawyers who needed retainers before they'd even consider taking on a case as unusual as theirs. It was Elena who finally found someone willing to help. A young attorney named Rebecca Marsh, who'd made her reputation defending indigenous land claims against railroad companies. She listened to their story with sharp intelligence, asking pointed questions and taking meticulous notes. "You understand this will make you vulnerable in new ways," Rebecca said after hearing them out. "Right now you don't exist legally, which means no protection but also no obligations. Once you incorporate, you're subject to all the laws and regulations everyone else follows, including the ones that favor powerful men over women who run from them." "We understand," Margaret said, "but we're already vulnerable. At least this way we have standing to defend ourselves." Rebecca tapped her pen against her notepad. "I'll need detailed documentation, maps of your land, records of your habitation, witness statements from everyone willing to testify about how long they've lived there and why. The territorial government is going to scrutinize this heavily. You're asking them to recognize a settlement that's been deliberately hiding from them for decades." "We can provide all of that," Thomas said. "Good. Then let's get started." The process took 3 months. 3 months of paperwork and testimony, of skeptical officials and hostile questioning. There were moments when Eliza was certain they'd be rejected, sent back to the mountains with nothing but bureaucratic rejection letters. But Rebecca proved to be exactly as tenacious as her reputation suggested. And slowly, impossibly, the pieces fell into place. During those months, Eliza and Cale found themselves spending more time together, partly by circumstance and partly by choice. He showed her the city, the parts tourists didn't see, markets where immigrants sold food from their home countries, theaters that showed plays no respectable venue would touch, neighborhoods where people who didn't fit anywhere else had carved out space for themselves. "Reminds me of the settlement," Eliza said one evening as they walked through a district where 3 different languages competed for dominance in the streets. People who found each other because nowhere else wanted them. "That's every city, really, just usually it's less obvious." Cale stopped at a vendor selling roasted nuts and bought a bag to share. "The settlement's just honest about it. We're all refugees from something. Might as well admit it and build from there." They talked about what would happen after. If the incorporation was approved, if they went back as a legitimate township, if the protection they sought actually materialized. Cale was cautiously optimistic. Eliza was terrified. "What if Charles finds out?" she asked one night as they sat on the steps of the boarding house, watching late traffic roll past. "What if legal recognition just puts a target on exactly where to find me? Then we deal with it, together, with lawyers and witnesses and all the infrastructure we're building." Cale's voice was steady. "You're not alone in this anymore, Eliza. That's the whole point." The approval came through on a Tuesday in late spring. Rebecca arrived at the boarding house with the documents and a rare smile. "Congratulations. As of this morning, you're the legally incorporated township of Havens Ridge. Population 83, square mileage pending final survey, status provisional for 1 year pending compliance review." She set the papers on the table. It's not perfect. You're going to have obligations now. Minimal tax assessments, reporting requirements, cooperation with territorial law enforcement when requested. But you're legitimate. You exist. Margaret picked up the documents with something like reverence. Havens Ridge? You needed a name for the filing. I took the liberty. You can change it if you want, but it'll require more paperwork. No, Margaret said. It's perfect. They celebrated that night, the whole delegation plus Rebecca, who'd been invited as an honorary member of the expedition. Someone produced a bottle of decent whiskey, and they drank to new beginnings and hard-won victories. But as Eliza watched them celebrate, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. They'd won this round, established their right to exist. But Charles was still out there, Marcus was still out there, and Anna was still dead. The thought must have shown on her face because Kael found her on the boarding house roof an hour later where she'd escaped the noise. You should be celebrating, he said. I know, but you're up here instead. I'm up here instead. Eliza looked at the city spread below them, lights winking in windows like scattered stars. Anna should be alive to see this. She died helping me, and she doesn't even know that her death led to something. Maybe she does. Wherever she is, maybe she knows. Kael sat next to her. But even if she doesn't, it still matters. What we're building, it matters. Does it? We got a bunch of papers that say we're allowed to exist. That doesn't change what Charles did, doesn't bring Anna back, doesn't guarantee he won't try again. No, it doesn't, but it changes the calculation. Before, you were a woman running alone with no resources and no protection. Now you're a registered resident of a legitimate township with legal standing and witnesses who'll testify on your behalf. It's not perfect, but it's better. Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted to let the hope in, the possibility that maybe she'd actually escaped. But years of Charles's control had taught her that hope was dangerous, that the moment you believed you were safe was the moment the trap closed. They returned to the settlement to Havens Ridge in early summer. The journey back felt different, lighter somehow, despite the same treacherous trails and thin mountain air. They were going home not as refugees, but as citizens of a place that officially existed. The settlement had transformed in their absence. The burned structures had been replaced with new ones, better designed and more solid. Gardens flourished in the long summer days. Children played in the square where council meetings were held. It looked less like a hidden refuge and more like an actual town. A celebration greeted them, people gathering to hear about the success and marvel at the official documents. Margaret read the incorporation papers aloud, her voice carrying across the crowd, and when she finished, the cheers were genuine. But that night, alone in her rebuilt cabin, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before something terrible. She'd felt this way before, in the weeks leading up to her escape from Charles. A certainty that change was coming, violent and inevitable. She was right. The message arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a territorial courier who looked uncomfortable with his assignment. It was addressed to Eliza Harrow, care of Havens Ridge Township, and the return address made her hands shake. Charles Harrow, Grafton. Margaret was there when Eliza opened it, standing witness in case the contents were threatening. The letter was brief, written in Charles's precise handwriting. Dear Eliza, I've recently learned of your survival and current residence through official territorial records. While I'm relieved to know you're alive, I must insist on your immediate return to Grafton to resolve our marital situation through proper legal channels. Failure to comply will result in legal action for abandonment and theft of property. You have 30 days to respond. Regards, Charles Harrow. The words were calm, reasonable, exactly what Charles would write, knowing other people might read it. But Eliza could read between the lines. The threat was clear: come back voluntarily or be dragged back by law enforcement. He can't do that, Margaret said. Abandonment isn't a crime. And what property did you allegedly steal? Myself, probably. In his mind, I'm property he purchased through marriage. Eliza set the letter down before her shaking hands betrayed her completely. He's going to use the courts. Make this legal and public. Force me to either come back or defend myself in front of judges who'll side with a wealthy man over a runaway wife. Then we fight it. We've got Rebecca. We've got documentation of why you left. We've got a whole community willing to testify. You think that matters? Charles has money and influence. He can afford to drag this out for years, make my life hell through legal fees and court appearances. Eliza's voice was rising, and she couldn't stop it. This is what he does. He finds your weakness, and he exploits it until you break. Cale appeared in the doorway. He must have heard the commotion. What happened? Margaret handed him the letter. He read it once, then again, his expression darkening. He's bluffing. Has to be. No court would force you back to an abusive marriage. You don't know that. You don't know what he's capable of. Eliza stood, needing to move, needing to do something. I should leave. Disappear completely this time. Change my name, move to Canada or California, somewhere he can't follow. No. Cale's voice was flat. No more running. You don't get to make that choice for me. You're right, I don't. But I'm asking you to make a different choice. I'm asking you to stay and fight. With what? Good intentions and hope? That's not enough against Charles. Then we make it enough. Margaret's voice cut through the rising panic. We contact Rebecca immediately. We prepare a response that makes it clear you're not coming back and you're not afraid of his legal threats. We document everything. The abuse, the escape, the murder of Anna Chen. We make this so public and so ugly that Charles has to back down or risk his reputation. His reputation is bulletproof. No one's reputation is bulletproof when murder's involved. Anna's death can be investigated, connected to Marcus Drummond, connected to Charles's search for you. Margaret's eyes were hard. You want to fight back? Let's actually fight back. Not just defend, but attack. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Eliza had spent so long being prey that the concept of becoming predator felt impossible. But looking at Margaret's determined face and Kael's steady support, she felt something shift. All right, she said. We fight. The letter they sent back to Charles was drafted by Rebecca with input from everyone. It was not polite. It detailed the abuse in clinical language, the broken ribs, the starvation, the locked room. It referenced Anna Chen's murder and suggested strongly that territorial authorities might want to investigate the circumstances. It concluded by stating that Eliza had no intention of returning to Grafton, and any attempt to force the issue would be met with full legal resistance and public disclosure of everything Charles had done. They sent copies to territorial authorities, to newspapers in 3 major cities, and to Charles himself via certified delivery. Then they waited. The response came not from Charles but from Marcus Drummond, who arrived in Havens Ridge 3 weeks later with 2 other men. They rode in openly, making no attempt at stealth, and asked to speak with Margaret and Eliza. The meeting took place in the town square, with half the settlement watching from nearby. Thomas and Kyle stood flanking Eliza, both armed. Elena and Sarah covered the approaches. If this was going to turn violent, they were ready. Marcus looked older than Eliza remembered, his face weathered and his eyes tired. He sat his horse and looked down at them with something that might have been regret. I'm not here to start trouble, he said. I'm here to deliver a message from Mr. Harrow. We got his letter, Margaret said. Our response was clear. I know, I read it. So did he. Marcus shifted in his saddle. He's willing to negotiate. Divorce, clean and simple. You sign papers agreeing to never speak publicly about your marriage. He agrees to make no claim on you or your current residence. You go your separate ways. Eliza stepped forward. And Anna Chen? What about her murder? Marcus's face tightened. I had nothing to do with that. That was Peterson, one of the trackers we hired. He went rogue, thought he was protecting the operation by eliminating a witness. Mr. Harrow was furious when he found out. Peterson's been dismissed and is currently facing questions from local law enforcement. How convenient. The hired help takes the fall while Charles walks away clean. It's the truth. Marcus met her eyes. I know you don't believe me. Don't blame you. But I'm done with this. I came to deliver the message and to tell you I'm quitting after this. What you wrote about, what happened to you, I didn't know, or maybe I didn't want to know. Either way, I can't unknow it now. The admission hung in the air. Eliza studied his face, looking for deception, but all she saw was exhaustion. Tell Charles I'll consider his offer, she said finally. Through my attorney. Any further communication goes through her. You're not welcome here, Marcus. Neither are your men. Leave. They left without argument, riding back down the mountain the way they'd come. The settlement watched them go in silence. You trust him? Kyle asked when they were out of sight. No. But I trust that Charles wants this to go away. The publicity we threatened scared him. He's trying to buy silence with a clean divorce. Eliza turned to face the assembled community. Question is whether we take it. The debate that followed was intense. Some argued for accepting the divorce and moving on. Others insisted they should push harder, make Charles face consequences for Anna's death. Rebecca, consulted by telegram, advised caution. A divorce is a win, her message read. Everything else is uncertain. You could spend years in court trying to prove Charles ordered Anna's murder and still lose. Meanwhile, you're free. Take the freedom. In the end, Eliza made the choice herself. She signed the divorce papers in Rebecca's office with Margaret, Kael, and Hannah as witnesses. The agreement was simple: dissolution of marriage, no financial claims either direction, mutual non-disclosure about the circumstances of the separation. Charles signed 3 days later. Just like that, it was over. Eliza walked out of Rebecca's office a free woman in every legal sense. But the freedom felt hollow, incomplete. Anna was still dead. Charles had faced no real consequences. Justice had been traded for peace, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. You did the right thing, Rebecca said, walking her to the door. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you survived, you escaped, and you built a life he can't touch. That's victory, even if it's not the victory you wanted. On the journey back to Havens Ridge, Eliza was quiet. Kael rode beside her, giving her space but staying close. When they stopped to make camp the first night, he finally broke the silence. Talk to me. I don't know what to say. I won. Charles is out of my life permanently. I should feel triumphant. But you don't. No, I feel like I compromised, like I let him buy his way out of facing what he did. Kael poked at the fire. You made a strategic choice. You traded perfect justice for guaranteed freedom. That's not compromise, that's intelligence. Feels like compromise. Then let it feel that way. Sit with it. But don't let it poison what you've accomplished. He looked at her across the flames. You escaped an abusive marriage, survived the desert, found a community that accepted you, helped establish a legitimate settlement, and secured your permanent freedom from a man who wanted to own you. That's not nothing, Eliza. That's extraordinary. She thought about that as they sat watching the fire. About the woman who'd walked into the desert choosing death over capture, and the woman she was now, still afraid, still scarred, but also stronger than she'd ever been. What happens now? She asked. Whatever you want. That's the point of freedom, isn't it? You get to decide. What Eliza decided was to stay in Havens Ridge and build something that mattered, not just for herself, but for the next person who'd show up broken and running. She threw herself into the community's development, helping establish a school for the children, working with Hannah to expand the gardens, assisting Rebecca with the legal framework that would protect the settlement's autonomy while keeping them in compliance with territorial law. And slowly, carefully, she let Kael into the spaces she'd kept walled off. It wasn't a smooth process. There were nights when the old fears surfaced and she pushed them away, times when intimacy felt like a threat rather than a gift. But he was patient, and she was trying, and gradually something new took root between them. It wasn't the romantic ideal she'd once imagined marriage should be. It was messier than that, more honest, built on mutual respect rather than ownership. They argued about stupid things and laughed at inappropriate moments, and sometimes just sat in comfortable silence while the world turned around them. It was real, and that made it worth everything. 2 years after Eliza first stumbled into the canyon half dead from dehydration, she stood at the eastern edge of Havens Ridge, watching the sun rise over the valley. The settlement had grown, nearly 100 people now, with more arriving every few months. People who needed what this place offered: sanctuary without conditions, community without judgment, freedom without qualification. Kael found her there, as he often did these days. He didn't say anything, just stood next to her and watched the light paint the mountains gold. I've been thinking, Eliza said after a while. Dangerous activity. She smiled despite herself. About Anna. About how she died helping someone she barely knew. About how that should matter more than it does. It matters. Not enough. Not legally. Peterson got a slap on the wrist for her murder. 18 months in territorial prison. Out in 9 months for good behavior. The injustice of it still burned. But I was thinking, what if we made it matter differently? What if we established something in her name, a fund, maybe, or a network? Help other people like me get out, get safe, start over. Kyle considered this. You're talking about building infrastructure for escaping abuse. Yes, safe houses, legal aid, supplies, connections. Everything I needed and mostly didn't have until Anna helped me. She turned to face him. We can't bring her back. Can't punish the people who killed her the way they deserve. But we could make sure her death saved more lives than just mine. That's a big project. I know, but we've built a town out of nothing. We've established legal recognition for a community that wasn't supposed to exist. Compared to that, building an escape network seems almost easy. He smiled then, the kind of smile that told her he'd been hoping she'd suggest exactly this. All right, let's do it, but we'll need help. They brought the idea to the community at the next council meeting. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People who'd escaped violence themselves volunteered their stories, their networks, their resources. Within a month, they had the skeleton of a plan. Within 6 months, the Anna Chen Memorial Fund was operational, helping women and families escape dangerous situations and find their way to places where they could start over. It wasn't perfect. They couldn't help everyone. Some people they tried to help went back to their abusers anyway. Some situations were too complex or too dangerous to intervene in safely, but they helped enough people that the work felt meaningful, redemptive even. 5 years after her escape, Eliza stood in the same canyon where Kyle had found her, but this time she wasn't running. She was guiding a woman named Sarah, not her Sarah from the settlement, a different Sarah, younger and more terrified, toward safety. The woman had walked for 3 days through the desert, following directions from a contact in the network. She was half dead from exposure, just like Eliza had been. How much further? Sarah asked, her voice hoarse. Not far. Another few hours and we'll be at the settlement. There's food there, shelter, people who'll help you figure out what comes next. Eliza offered her the water canteen. You're safe now. I know you don't believe that yet, but it's true. Sarah drank deeply, then looked at Eliza with haunted eyes. How do you know? How can you be sure? Because I was where you are 5 years ago, running, terrified, certain I'd die alone in this desert. Someone found me and offered me a choice. I'm offering you the same thing. What you do with it is up to you. They climbed out of the canyon as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. At the top, Kyle was waiting with horses and supplies. He helped Sarah into a saddle while Eliza mounted her own horse, and together they rode toward the lights of Haven's Ridge, glowing in the distance. As they rode, Eliza thought about the woman she'd been, broken, desperate, choosing death over captivity. She thought about Anna, who'd given that woman food and water and a slim chance at survival. She thought about Kyle and Margaret and Hannah and all the people who'd turned that slim chance into something real and lasting. And she thought about Sarah, riding beside her toward an uncertain future, but at least riding toward it free. Freedom, Eliza had learned, wasn't a destination you reached and then stopped. It was a practice, a choice you made every day. The choice to define yourself rather than be defined, to build rather than merely survive, to stand with others instead of standing alone. She'd lost things along the way, her youth, her innocence, whatever naive faith she'd once had in the world's basic fairness. Anna had lost her life. Others had lost homes, safety, peace of mind. The costs were real and permanent. But what they'd built from those losses was real too. A community that protected its own. A network that helped people escape violence. A living testament to the fact that ordinary people could build extraordinary things when they chose to care about each other's survival. Years later, when people asked Eliza about her journey, and they did ask, especially the newcomers who needed to believe escape was possible, she would tell them the truth. That it had been terrifying and painful and frequently felt impossible. That she'd made mistakes and compromises and choices she still questioned. That the scars, physical and otherwise, never fully faded. But she would also tell them this, that she'd walked into the desert choosing death over captivity, and in that choosing had found something she never expected. Not just survival, but life. Not just escape, but home. Not just freedom from something, but freedom for something. For building, for loving, for becoming whoever she chose to be. And in the end, that was the thing Charles had never understood and never could. You couldn't own a person who'd already claimed ownership of themselves. You couldn't control someone who'd walked through fire and come out the other side knowing they could survive anything. Eliza stood on the ridge above Haven's Ridge, watching the community she'd helped build go about its evening routines. Lights appeared in windows. Children were called in for supper. The forge went quiet as Sarah, finished her day's work. Somewhere in the settlement, Hannah was probably lecturing someone about proper garden maintenance, and Margaret was buried in administrative work she claimed to hate, but secretly thrived on. Cale climbed the ridge to join her, moving with the same quiet grace he'd had the day they met. He stood next to her in comfortable silence, and after a moment she leaned into him, letting him take some of her weight. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. How strange it is to be happy." She looked up at him. "I never thought I'd be allowed to be happy. It felt like something that happened to other people, in other lives. And now I know better. Happiness isn't something you're allowed or not allowed. It's something you build, piece by piece, choice by choice. Especially when, the world tells you that you don't deserve it." He kissed the top of her head. "You deserve it. You fought for it. Both are true." They stood together as night fell completely, stars emerging overhead in patterns Eliza had memorized during her years in the mountains. She thought about the girl she'd been at 17, marrying a man she didn't love to settle her father's debts. About the woman she'd been at 20, locked in a room and starving because she'd dared to look at another man. About the version of herself who'd walked into the killing desert with nothing but Anna's supplies and stubborn refusal to be property. All of those women were still inside her somewhere, part of the architecture of who she'd become. But they didn't define her anymore. She'd taken their pain and their fear and their desperate courage and built something new from it, something that belonged entirely to her. Below them, Haven's Ridge glowed softly in the darkness. An impossible town in an impossible place, built by impossible people who'd refused to accept the world's verdict on their worth. It wasn't perfect. Nothing built by humans ever was. But it was theirs, and it was enough. Eliza took Kael's hand and started down the ridge toward home, toward the lights and the voices and the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of a life she'd chosen for herself. She'd learned what she'd needed to learn in the hardest way possible, that freedom wasn't given by society or bestowed by law or granted by the powerful. Freedom was claimed through courage, maintained through community, and proved through the simple act of waking up each day and choosing to live as if you belonged to yourself. Everything else was just details. And in the gathering dark, walking down from the ridge with Kael beside her and Haven's Ridge glowing below, Eliza Harrow smiled. Not because everything was perfect or because the pain had disappeared or because justice had been fully served, but because she was alive, because she was free, because she had become exactly who she'd fought to be, and that finally was enough. Finally was